Hello everybody, welcome back to Tales from Reddit, a series where I read out Reddit stories to you. Today we're going to be taking a look from r/MaliciousCompliance. Let's start the show. So first story was posted by MaliciousCompliance, MaliciousCompliance. Pronounce that however you will. Title for this chapter is Just the Stereo. It's a medium-sized story, so strap in. I got a shorter one for you today, hopefully give you all at least a little giggle. I am not the one who was complied or who did the compliance, but was involved in most of the happenings. It's been a long time, so prices feel right might not be the actual price, and the conversation is as best as I can remember. So let's set the Wayback Machine to the late 90s and enjoy. Oh joy. My buddy, we'll call Jay, wanted a new stereo in his 98 Chevy Caliber. He was trying to convince me to install it at my dad's engine shop, which I would have done, but I quickly realized his budget and wants were as well. He wanted a Corvette on a Chevette budget, if you catch my drift. Don't get me wrong, he wasn't trying to screw me or anyone else. He just didn't have the knowledge of what such things cost, and he was struggling out in the world on his own for the first time, so he had the budget he had. I offered to go with him to a few shops, hoping to educate him on what he needs to complete his vision and hopefully set him on the right track without peeving off the shops. At best, I might have been able to trade some favors to get Jay a deal. A week went by before our schedule aligned, and the night before we were supposed to meet, he tells me he doesn't need my help anymore. Shop X was going to help him get a stereo for something like $1,500. Well, no, $150. I remember thinking that this might cover the cost of a display or use stereo in the range he wanted, but wouldn't cover the install kits or speakers he would also need. I did not expect it to be installed for that price. I knew his old abused stock speakers were not going to give him the experience he wanted. Week later, Jay showed up at my dad's shop complaining his new stereo wasn't working. Surprise, surprise. It wasn't a great install, but far from the worst I've ever seen. No install kit, just a black painted board to fill the gaps. The wires were directly twisted together, not the matching harness. Late 80s Chevy, really not an issue. And it did work, but like I suspected, his stock speakers were shot. The MC. I sent Jay home while I was going to make some calls. I knew a sales guy at Shop X, so I gave him a call to find out the details of what went down. The sales guy just told me he repeatedly insisted he just wanted a stereo and no extra junk. So I told him just the stereo. Since I was on speaker, our parts guy, did a split take with his coffee before he cracked up laughing. The aftermath. Just the part name here became a running joke between R and I. I took pity on Jay, and head unit was decent, but an older model. I was selling my car, so I pulled out the rear speakers since they would fit and were at least a bit better than being a mid-level aftermarket set. I called in a favor from the other buddy and got a used working full range 2-channel amp for a song. I installed these into Jay's car with him ponying up for a few odds and ends to make it all work. And he paid the rest off with some sweat currency to both myself and some of my dad's shop. We're still friends to this day, and now when I tell Jay he needs to adjust his wants to his budget, he listens. Well, at least most of the time. Ooh, joy. Yeah, I can somewhat picture that. The thing is, I wasn't born, well, I have no memories of the 90s because by the time I was born, it was basically over already, so yeah, so I can't really imagine it very well, but picturing from like when I was young, a lot of cars were like made in the 90s and such, and so like they're like, oh yes, check out my cars from the 90s or whatever, because around the time I was born, people were still kind of in the phase of the 90s. um, so I can somewhat at least imagine it. Anyways, on to the next story. This story was posted by user William Sujitsu. I think that's how you say it. I don't know. Anyway, so the title for this chapter is A Safety Concern, I Agree. It's a small story, so strap in. I coordinate with contract workers to fix, maintain buildings and properties. My company owns basically an employee says, hey, this is broken, and I bring the correct people to fix the problem. Safety is the highest importance for my company. Because of this, people try to use/abuse this culture. Oh no. There are many examples of this, but I'll give you a more recent one. An older employee came to me and explained that his favorite parking spot, under a big shade tree, doesn't have a parking block, concrete block that your front tire hits. Today he was parking, drove way too far forward, and the front of his car went into the grass, about 3-inch drop. He asked if I could get one put in. I told him I don't see a problem with installing one. I don't know how long it'll take, but I will work on it. He then flashes a little grin and says kind of snarky, I think it's a safety concern. He thinks by invoking that phrase, things will magically happen faster. I smile back at him and say, I agree, it's a safety concern, and because of that, we are going to have to block off that area until it can be fixed. Realizing he just lost his favorite parking spot, he says, well, I don't think. I cut him off and says, no, we have to. You said it's a safety concern, and we can't continue to use the spot if your safety is concerned. He smiles. His smile changes to a "you got me" smile. Yeah, that's on you, buddy. Like, straight up, that's on the person who said it. That's on them, straight up. Like, they could have just said, hey, look, my wheels went off into the grass. I apologize for that. Can you please put like a block there or something, because it would be bad if someone else did it. Like a 3-inch drop, it's not that big of a safety concern, really. Oh, and it's annoying, and your car might not like it, but it's not a big safety concern. Like, seriously, that's like a fourth of a foot. I'm not even gonna try to do the math on it, but yeah, it's not that big of a concern. Anyways, on to the next story. This story was posted by user SBRB8. Okay. The title of this chapter is, You Want Me to Lie About My Hours So I Won't Go Into Overtime? Okay. It's a medium-sized story, so let's strap in. I work in theater, doing front of house / customer service work. So that means I typically do a lot of odd hours with evenings and weekends. At my former job, they only wanted to pay me hourly, despite asking for a salary numerous times, and honestly, it would have benefited them more than me. On average, my weekdays would run from 2 to 10. as I had my managerial / admin work I had to do during the day, which I couldn't always do during shows and events. I tried to schedule things so I wouldn't go into overtime, but every once in a while it happened. Shows run long, people like to stay and chat, rental events don't know their timing well and really mess up the time. It happens, just part of the job. So it would be pretty common for me to finish within 8.5 or 9 hour days. And since I was paid hourly, that meant overtime. Eventually, my boss and the executive director talked to me about why I so often went into overtime and why did I come in early when I knew I'd be staying late. I outlined that unless I couldn't, I would schedule my days to try and have some leeway to avoid daily overtime, but it wasn't always possible, and they should understand that, especially my boss, as she had my position at one point before I started. Well, they did acknowledge that point. They didn't want to constantly pay for the little bit of overtime. Their solution was for me to adjust the hours on my timesheet on a day I worked over 8 hours and just take off what would have been overtime and put it on a different day. In other words, abuse labor laws so they wouldn't have to pay me an extra $9 or so for the half hour of daily overtime. I was unimpressed, but I was already looking for a new job, so I decided to play ball because I knew I could still make my point with some malicious compliance. Thankfully, that first week there were events I knew would likely run long, and they didn't disappoint. I ended up having to spread 6.5 hours of work over 2 days, one of which I came in after 5. But I ended up putting on my schedule that I came in at 2, still the same hours work, just spread out to avoid the daily OT. Well, of course, when timesheets were checked over, this was noticed that there were 2 days I charged for being in the office when I wasn't by our accountant. When she asked what the situation was, I explained that I did what was requested. I took the daily overtime hours and moved them to days I wasn't going into overtime. Thankfully, the accountant and I were pretty close, so she just rolled her eyes at the stupidity of it all and went to talk to my boss and the ED about it. The cherry on top of it all, because I still claimed the same amount of hours, I still went into weekly overtime, which ended up meant I got more money because the weekly hours all came in one lump, rather than being spread out over the daily hours. 4 hours at 1.5 hours and 2.5 at double hours rather than 6.5, all at time and a half. Oddly enough, for the last couple months I worked at that mess of a theater, they didn't really harp on me about my daily overtime anymore. Yeah, frankly, I probably wouldn't have done it like that. I probably would have just said, okay, whatever you say, and recorded down on my phone, like each time I clocked in or all that. And then probably would have brought it up, like at like a meeting or something like that. I don't know. I probably wouldn't exactly have done that, but I would have tried to do something different. Anyways, that's all for that. Thank you all for watching. Have a good day, night, evening, afternoon. Bye.